Okay, hi everybody, I'm Jonathan, many of you know me. We are going to do a little demonstration of how to do our Awareness, Courage, Love assessment. And so the idea is that we will be doing an exercise at the intensive in groups of 3 as a pod. And each person will have a role to play, and we will do the interview for one person who's the client, and then we'll switch roles and we'll do it so each person gets to be the client. And so in this assessment, I'm going to be the primary therapist, and what I have in my lap is this handout here, which you guys will get. It's basically the Awareness, Courage, Love figure visual diagram. And I will just be describing the diagram a little bit. As I do the assessment. Even though when we do the assessment in the intensive, I will have described it, so you might not need to do that. This is just more for now. But then I'll basically be doing the assessment with this handout 6, which we have some notes on it because we already started practicing before, but ignore the notes. Handout 6, which is basically our ACL quick assessment and case conceptualization. And I'll be using this to sort of jot down my notes and as a prompt for my questions. And this is Catherine, a graduate student in the lab, and she's going to be the client.
I also have a handout. This is handout 10. It's a list of possible CRB 1s and 2s related to awareness, courage, and love. So between each question, I will be referring to the part of the sheet that relates to the next set of questions and kind of prompting myself to start thinking about what my 1s and 2s in these various domains may be.
And this is Daniel. Daniel's a postdoc in the lab, and you in this role play are going to be like the therapist helper and also kind of functioning as the pod leader.
Yeah. So I have handout number 8, which is a list of ACL assessment questions. I'll also be helping prompt Jonathan or Catherine to review their handouts as needed to help get at some of the questions that may or may not come up. So we'll go from there.
And so basically the idea is Catherine's going to be our client in this little practice, and it'll be kind of weird because it's FAP, and so we're supposed to be having a live interaction, but we know we're being recorded, and so it's kind of fake, but hopefully it'll still be useful to everybody. And but basically the idea is that we are helping Catherine assess her CRB 1s and 2s related to this model, basically doing a case conceptualization of Catherine as if she was our client and we were beginning FAP therapy using this model as our guide. So hopefully it'll all make sense. Anything to add before I start?
Sounds great.
Okay, so the idea of the Awareness, Courage, Love model here is that it's a model for how we can have meaningful, intimate interactions with people with whom we want to have meaningful, intimate interactions. So it's not a model for all interactions because we have all sorts of interactions that our goal is not to produce meaning and connection and intimacy. But obviously meaningful, intimate interactions are important to us in a lot of life, and so that's what we're focusing on. So as I ask these questions and talk about it, you'll be thinking about yourself in interactions that matter to you. Okay, and so I need a pen. Here it is, right here. Okay, so it starts with awareness, and awareness is, I think we all know what it means. We want to be aware of what we're feeling in the interaction, what our needs are, what we need from the other person, what our values are. I value intimacy and connection. We want to be aware of sort of who we are and who we want to be and what we're feeling. And this obviously helps us make better choices. Sorry, I just touched your knee, Daniel. Make better choices in intimate interactions. And so my first question to you is how are you at sort of knowing what you're feeling in intimate interactions?
Now, would it help to review the list of CRB 1s and 2s before we get into that question?
Yes, thank you, Pod Leader.
You're welcome.
So what I'm supposed to do before asking the question is I'm supposed to ask Catherine to take a quick scan at that first category of self-awareness there, which is possible CRB 1s and 2s that might apply. So why don't you do that now, and I'll take a look at my list here while you do that.
And as a reminder, this is on handout 10.
You got it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. So what pops up for you? How do you feel you are in terms of sort of awareness of yourself, your feelings, your needs, and interactions?
I feel pretty good in this domain. I feel pretty aware of what my needs and feelings are. Sometimes it can take me a little while to identify, especially when I'm in a kind of highly emotional state, why I'm feeling the way that I am. But I think in general that's something that I'm pretty good at.
How aware do you feel? How aware are you of what you're feeling right now?
I am pretty aware of what I'm feeling right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have no reason not to trust your, I know you well because I know you, and I have no reason not to trust your self-report. So I'm just writing notes down here saying good under client report on other interactions. I'm just writing good takes a while when emotional. And my live observations of you, I'm just saying good, you look pretty aware. Obviously we could ask many more questions. Daniel, you may want to supplement with a question or two. You don't have to at this moment, but I feel, just to keep it quick, I feel like, okay, moving on, I just wrote good.
Great.
That feel about right for you?
Yeah.
So the next category is other awareness, which is basically the same set of things we want to be aware of, but of the other person. You have good self-awareness of what you're feeling and your values and who you are. How aware are you of the other person in the interaction? Do you tend to have a sense of what they're feeling and what they need, or are you not that attuned to the other person? And so before I ask you those questions, take a look at the potential CRB 1s and 2s in that category there, just to sort of prime you for talking about this for a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So what's your immediate reactions? How are you in terms of being aware of the other person?
I think that other awareness is something that I very much value, and I think I am relatively skillful in accurately assessing other people's emotional states and needs.
What do you think I'm feeling right now as we do this?
At this moment, I think it seems like you're probably still have some residual anxiety about all that you have to get accomplished this week, kind of floating around in the back of your head. I imagine that you're also feeling a little bit perhaps frustrated by the artificiality of the interaction that we're having.
And are you just sort of assuming that because you know me, or are you actually picking up on anything from me?
I think that I am picking up on just kind of like little things in your vocal cadence, and also kind of your facial expressions, and particularly like this kind of like sardonic smile that you have going on.
So there's a little tension, a little like I'm performing a little bit. I'm not fully genuine. It's because we're doing this thing.
Exactly.
So you're
yeah.
noticing these little differences in me.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty accurate. And so for live observations, I'm going to say pretty accurate. And obviously, again, we could talk for a few more minutes about all this and sort of flesh it out in more detail. But I know you well enough to know that actually I agree with you. I think this is a strength of yours. Anything you want to add, Daniel?
No.
So we could also talk about sort of the balance of being aware of yourself, your own feelings, and versus being aware of the other.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of like where your strengths and weaknesses are? I mean, you sound pretty good at other awareness, pretty good at self-awareness, but maybe other awareness is your dominant focus.
Yeah, I think that is probably a bit of a weakness. It's kind of overvaluing, at least, kind of what's going on for the other and maybe undervaluing what's going on for myself.
So if we were to target this as in therapy or something like that, we would be potentially a little more focused on keeping you in touch with your own feelings, especially when emotional, and having that better balanced with your sort of really good sensitivity and attunement to the other.
Yeah, I think that seems to track with my own self-conception.
Okay. So the model starts with awareness, and you can see I already asked one question about the balance there of other awareness and self-awareness, which is in here. Now we have courage and love, and the idea is that courage and love are in a relation to each other. One person acts with courage, and the other person responds with love. And so what we want in intimacy is to be good at both the courage end of the relation and the love end of the relation. And the model specifies 3 primary courage-love relations that we are saying are pretty fundamental to intimacy. So what I'll do is I'll just go through each of the courage elements of these 3 relations and each of the love elements of these 3 relations, and we'll do a quick assessment of how you are in each of these.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sounds great.
Okay, and so before I start, take a quick look at the CRB 1s and 2s on your list there, under being vulnerable.
Okay.
And just sort of scan it for a minute, and then I'll ask you your reactions to it. Let me take a look here too.
Great.
So the first relation is the most basic one. It's just, the courage end is just being vulnerable in the interaction, and the love end is providing safety and acceptance to that vulnerable person. And so in terms of the being vulnerable end of the interaction, is this something that you can do? Obviously nobody really loves being vulnerable, but how are you in terms of being vulnerable in intimate interactions?
I think I am able to push myself to be vulnerable with perhaps a more selective group of people than I would ideally like. So if I were to target something in terms of vulnerability, it would be kind of improving my skill at not always putting on like a good image with kind of, you know, the second tier of people that I'm in relationships with. So like not my most intimate relationships, but maybe like a step more removed.
So if I understand correctly, you feel pretty good in your most intimate relationships. You can really let yourself be seen even in moments of weakness and vulnerability. But there's sort of a second tier of close friends where maybe you're more image conscious and a little more controlled.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
And so I wouldn't want to pathologize that too much because that seems pretty normal to me. But we could certainly talk about if that would be something you'd want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we were really doing this interview in the intensive or in therapy, I would want to be exploring how vulnerable you are experiencing yourself right now with me. But it's a weird question to ask with this because we're just sort of, like, I don't know what would even be appropriate in terms of vulnerability right now with the camera on and everything.
Yeah.
But I guess I could just ask in general, how much do I see your vulnerability?
Yeah, I would count you as one of these, like, kind of people that I put on a certain image for. And at the same time, I feel pretty, like, solid and safe in our relationship. And so maybe that's what I'm talking about is, like, there would be, like, an opportunity to be a little bit more vulnerable in a safe and, like, smart context in our relationship.
And the balance of sort of being authentic, but also sort of wanting to present your best self to your advisor makes perfect sense to me.
Yes.
Again, I'm not pathologizing you here or
Yeah.
thinking this is a problem, but I think you're just accurately, showing some vulnerability by admitting that, I think, in a nice way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if we were in the actual intensive, we would have done an experiential earlier.
Yeah.
And so I would potentially ask, how vulnerable were you earlier this morning when we were doing that thing where we were walking around sharing things with each other?
I think I was very vulnerable.
You were?
Yes.
We're just making it up, but you could ask that.
Another question that might be worth exploring in this category is how does showing up and putting other people first show up in this courage category? So you indicated that other awareness is really high up. So looking at is putting yourself first, you being vulnerable in a way. And so looking at how that fits in, and that might be worth exploring.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Should I answer it?
You don't have
If you'd
to.
like to.
Sure, yeah, no, I can. I think that's really astute. I think a big part of my hesitation to be vulnerable with people that I care about and want to be close with is kind of feeling like I might be overburdening them, yeah. With
Taking away from the focus on them by focusing on yourself.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Okay, the second relation is between self-disclosing and understanding. And so the idea here is the first relation is just about letting yourself be vulnerable, just experiencing it in an interaction. And the idea of self-disclosing is now you're actually talking about what you're feeling. So the first one, being vulnerable, doesn't actually have to be verbal. You could just show emotion on your face. Other ways experience vulnerability in my presence. But the second relation is about talking about your feelings, just spontaneously sharing who you are, who you want to be, talking about yourself in ways that help other people get to know you, or sharing what you're feeling. So that's sort of my brief overview of it. You want to take a quick look at the CRB 1s and 2s there under self-disclosing, and then we'll talk about it.
Great. Okay.
On the handout here it says, authentically sharing feelings and thoughts with others. How are you at that?
I think that I am pretty skillful at doing it when I do it, but similar to showing vulnerability, I think it takes a bit of prompting for me to feel like comfortable taking up space to talk about things like that.
Mm-hmm. So we're hitting on this theme of the balance, you know, that you can do it as long as you feel that you're not overburdening the other person.
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, I just saw you do it. I thought it was a really nice example when you said, you can be vulnerable with me, but you're also image conscious. And so it's sort of that mix. That actually is a really good example of you sharing your thoughts and feelings and just who you are with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of a perfect example of what this category is about. So I know you can do it. Anything to add?
I don't think so. No, I think you got a great in the moment example combined with kind of report of how you're doing outside of it.
Yeah, so we're going pretty quickly through the interview at this point, which is fine, right? I mean, you're saying, I think we've got this theme identified. You can do this, but you have to sort of feel safe that the other person's not going to get upset or feel taken away from.
Yeah.
And then you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's very accurate.
Okay, the next category here on the courage side is asking. And so the idea is that self-disclosing is just talking about your feelings and who you are and what's going on in your life. And then asking is more specifically asking for something specific. And so if you look at the model, there's a couple of options, but the options aren't meant to be exclusive or exhaustive. They're just sort of common ideas. Pretty much asking for anything applies here. So asking questions is the first item on the list here. And if you're just getting to know somebody, some people are really good at just talking about themselves, but to get to know someone, you also have to balance that by asking the other person questions. So it's just asking questions. Asking for closeness. I want to be closer to you. Can you express that need or that desire? Asking for changes. This is the hardest one. This is about when somebody's doing something that upsets you. This is sort of like assertiveness or asking for boundaries or for more space, but always in the context, in our case, of wanting to keep and improve the relationship. You obviously could just tell somebody to go away. You don't want to be in a relationship with them anymore. It's kind of different than what we're talking about here. This is asking in the context of wanting the relationship. And then asking for other specific things. That's the fourth item on the list here. You're taking a look, I see, at the ones and twos.
Yep.
How are you at asking for what you need?
I think I'm okay at it. It's something that historically has been a little bit difficult, and I think I'm getting more assertive at it, but it's certainly something that is a continual target.
Okay. And again, it's weird with the camera on, but if we were at the intensive, a very reasonable question would be, anything you need right now from me or from us in your pod.
Yeah.
And then that would just be an opportunity both to give you what you needed and also to assess how you do with that question.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you need right now that's reasonable and not just goofy?
I think, yeah, it'd be nice to have some, like, good job, Catherine, at the end of this. Something like that would be great.
Okay, if I said it right now, it would be too forced.
Right, yeah.
But I actually do think you're doing a good job, but I realize I would not entirely meet your need to just give it to you right in this moment. But that's good. That's a 2. That would be a 2, right? You just said historically you're bad at this. And I just said anything you need right now, and then you just said I would like some positive feedback. So you just engaged in a 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would ideally give you what you needed, but it's just too weird to do it right now. But I'm going to later. I promise I will later.
I believe you.
I know you do. Okay, so let's move on. Anything to add, Daniel?
No, I mean, one thing I might do is assess the difference between wants and needs. Like, are you good at speaking up about needs, but maybe less good about what would be beneficial? And see how, especially given the theme of CRB that we've kind of identified.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think it's easier to talk about or to ask for things that I feel like are needs, and I notice that even in asking for some kind of positive feedback, that it seems like a very silly thing. And when I self-define things as like silly, it feels harder to ask for them. So
Right.
I think that's a good question.
If it's just a want and not a need, then it's expendable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's good. So if you were so far if you were our client, we'd be celebrating your other awareness and your attunement to others. We'd be working on balancing that with a little more self-awareness, especially of sort of not primary needs, but all the other stuff that is important that maybe you would tend to dismiss. And getting you to be a little more self-focused, a little more asking for what you want in those situations.
Yeah.
Does this seem about right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that was a really great clarifying question.
Yeah,
Daniel.
that's good. Okay, so what I did is I asked about the first 3 courage sides of these 3 relations, and now I'm going to ask about the 3 love sides, going back up to the first one, responding to when other people are vulnerable. This is now your love response. So the other 3 questions were about you and the courage part of the interaction, and now you're in the love part of the interaction. And I know this is kind of your strength, but we'll still go through this just to make sure we cover your strengths. If someone else is vulnerable with you, how are you at providing safety and acceptance? Oh, I'm supposed to ask you to review the list there, because you might not know it as well as I do. So this is to me, this is a very fundamental relation. It's kind of like the air that we breathe in relationships. The necessity of providing safety and acceptance when the other person is vulnerable in relationships. It's where everything starts, really. And honestly, if the roles were switched right now, and you were interviewing me, I would actually say this is where I would need to be working. I've done so much FAP work, I'm actually very good at being vulnerable, and I kind of forget or get lost in my own vulnerability. I forget about keeping the other person safe when I'm so emotional, which is probably not typical for a guy. Anyway, I'm talking about myself, but I'm actually doing it strategically, and because this gives you an opportunity to respond to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
How is it hearing me talk about myself right now?
I feel pretty connected to you, and I think it's easy for me to, I view you very positively, so it's easy for me to kind of forget about areas that, or forget about the fact that you are also a person. And so it feels connecting to hear about areas of possible growth for you as well.
In general, aside from this moment, how are you at sort of providing safety and acceptance to others when they're vulnerable?
I think I'm pretty skilled at it.
You're pretty good at it. I think you are too.
Thanks.
Yeah. What else you want? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it's something that I value being kind of a safe person to talk to.
And the next, anything to add?
No.
And the next level in the model is providing safety and acceptance in response to being vulnerable. And then when the other person is then talking about themselves, how are you at actually listening with empathy and understanding? All of this is related. These relations, these first and second relations are related. And so I know you, I know this is also a strength of yours. And you agree with me about that?
I do.
Just providing understanding and empathy when other people are talking about themselves.
Yeah, I think it is a strength, and I think it's very important, and so I think it is also something that I could continue to work on as well.
Could always get better.
Yeah.
Well, that's your value there. Yeah, yeah. I actually think you're quite good at it, because I know you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that.
So we're moving quickly now. The third relation is when somebody asks for something specific. How good are you at attuning to really specifically what they're asking for and giving them what they need. So you're now looking at the ones and twos associated with that category there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, got an idea.
And what do you think?
I think I'm quite good at this. Yeah, I think being able to give people what they need or what they want is something that I care a lot about and put thought into. And so I think I'm pretty good at it.
And there would potentially be some live questions to ask, but it would just be weird to do it right now. Like I would say, if I were to ask you for something I needed in this moment, then we would have a live way to test how you do that, but we're not gonna do that, it's just too weird. Yeah.
Okay.
So now what happens in the model is we've gone over these first three relations, and then you see the fourth one is kind of a summary relation. This is the goal of the whole thing. It starts with you engaging in courage, me responding with love to that courage, and then you responding to my love with connection. What we've labeled here in the fourth relation is connection. And if you follow the arrows around, we've identified two elements of connection that are useful to assess. The first one is vulnerably accepting love, and then the second one is self-disclosing closeness. And so the basic idea is, when I've responded to you with love, with safety and acceptance, with understanding, empathy, or with giving you what you need, then you respond by accepting that love and by telling me you feel closer and more connected to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the stereotypical FAP thing to say, and this is kind of where it shows up most obviously in the model. So let's take a look first at the first one, vulnerably accepting love, and just talk about that for a minute or two. You can take a look at the ones and twos associated with it there.
Okay.
Anything you want to add, Daniel?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
How are you at accepting other people, trying to be nice and loving to you? Just letting them influence you and
I think I am pretty good at this. Yeah, I think I sometimes have the impulse to kind of challenge what they're saying or give reasons why their feedback is not accurate, but I think I don't engage too much in that behavior, and I think that's pretty normal response. So I feel pretty good about my ability to kind of accept that kind of train of thought and also kind of hold both.
And when I earlier told you that I was working on providing safety and acceptance, you actually did, in that moment, the other connecting behavior of just telling you felt closer to me. And it seemed to come out of you really easily. I think this also seems to be something you don't struggle with. You can do this in the right moments. Am I observing that correctly?
Yeah, and I really appreciate you saying that. That means a lot to me. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good. I feel awkward. You're better at it than I am, I think. I sort of rushed through these last two, but it's because I think it's not something that we would be really focusing on with you. It is. I think these are twos for you that come really easily. Anything to add, Daniel?
No. I think there was a great example of being accepting in the room. You gave a really nice compliment,
Yeah.
and Catherine was able to say thank you, and it means a lot to me. So I
Yeah,
think
you
we
did.
even had a great in the moment assessment there.
So that's the whole model, and if you look at the case conceptualization form, you'll notice that those last two, vulnerably accepting love and appreciation from others, and disclosing feelings of closeness, connection, and love to others, are actually sort of subcategories under the courage categories of being vulnerable and self-disclosing. And the idea is that the model sort of loops in on itself at this point, and this way you can sort of continue on into the future, and it doesn't become so mechanical. It all sort of flows together, and just sort of moves courage, love, and it all sort of blends and gets really messy. But still, I hope the basic way it's laid out is a useful way to sort of just assess these big ideas. You'll see at the bottom of the model there's this circle of self-care that the two people are standing on. We'll talk a lot about self-care at the intensive. We always do in FAP. It's super important. But I'm not seeing it as specifically part of the model in the same way because it's not as interactional, it's not as intimate. And this is really a model of intimacy. It's important to intimacy, but it's not something that shows up in the intimate moment in the same kind of way. We could talk all about that later. I won't get into it now. And then there's two other things in the model, this idea of balance and reciprocity. We already touched on the idea of balance. The idea of reciprocity is that if one person in a relationship is always in the courage role and the other is always in the love role, well then that's not going to go too well in the long run. And so it has to be reciprocal, back and forth. And we could assess that too if we needed to. Mm-hmm. But I have a pretty good assessment of you, Catherine. I feel like if you were my client, you would be pretty clear to me. And the way it played out is you're actually mapping onto what would be a pretty typical FAP client, focusing on courage more than love, because you're strong at love. Your balance would be to boost up the courage. Your love is already pretty high. Boost up the courage specifically with respect to awareness of what you're feeling in emotional moments and asking for what you want in those moments, even if it doesn't hit the bar of a need. Mm-hmm. And this is what we'd work on, and this is sort of the basic FAP thing. There's other little details that showed up, but that's sort of the big theme. That would be our case conceptualization. Does that feel about right? Anything you'd want to add?
That seems very accurate. Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
No, that seems pretty accurate.
And so we'd be doing this kind of assessment at the very beginning of the intensive, and then you'd have sort of some ACL goals, 1s and 2s, to be focusing on through the rest of the experientials. It would be, and again, in your case, it's a pretty good fit for the intensive. It would be being aware of your feelings when it gets emotional, and then asking for what you need and talking about those feelings in a little bit more of a vulnerable, risky way than maybe you're typically used to doing.
Yeah. I can't wait.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.